very good afternoon to everyone and welcome back to AED 2023 Day 2 post-tea session. This session talks about climate change, a real threat. The keynote speaker is Mr. Suresh Prabhu. Mr. Suresh Prabhu is founding chancellor, Rishihood University. He is a former union minister with 10 portfolios and the former minister of parliament, 4 times Lok Sabha and 2 times Rajya Sabha to the government of India. He is an active professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Mr. Prabhu will join us online and share his views on climate change, a real threat. We welcome you, sir. I now invite Mr. Pradeep Bhargav, Chairman, Automotive Stampings and Assemblies Limited, to offer introductory remarks for this session. Over to you, Pradeep, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, sir. My privilege to initiate a dialogue on climate change in the Pune Asia Economic Dialogue. Climate does not know boundaries, so this dialogue is truly, at Pune International Center, is truly international. And in lighter vein, if climate change, any city has to qualify, my city, Pune, qualifies, because in a span of 24 hours, we have temperature variation of 24 degrees centigrade. Just last week, we had 8 degrees centigrade as our minimum temperature and 32 degrees centigrade as our maximum temperature, all within 24 hours. I mean, the point I wanted to bring out is we are going through some very interesting times. The program profile for this evening is with all of you, and I'll share the flow of the program for the next 30 minutes. In the first part, we have the privilege of listening to, and you can see the gentleman, Mr. Suresh Prabhu's views on India's climate commitments, challenges, and breakthroughs. I'll only do the brief context setting, and thereafter Mr. Prabhu will mesmerize you. I can assure you this, I've heard him every time, and it's unbelievable. Thereafter, we'll have a panel discussion on meeting climate targets, the road ahead, with 3 distinguished guests. 2 of them are here, and 1 is going to be online. So we are all indeed fortunate to have you with us, sir. Your vision, your perspective, your roles and your accomplishments are known to all of us. There are so many facets to his persona, but today we'll be seeing the green face of this evergreen leader of ours. I will not go through what all your achievements are. With your permission, I want to introduce you to this audience based on my personal experience in working with you over the last many years. It was before you took the stewardship of the Ministry of Railways. It was we in CII who approached you to start this whole concept of GreenCo. You inaugurated it for us, and thereafter, once you took over the ministry, it was under your guidance that the Indian Railways decided to embark upon its complete journey of GreenCo and green. Every single enterprise in Indian Railways, based on Mr. Prabhu's guidance, converted itself into GreenCo company. Words like environment sustainability and carbon neutrality, which are very, very much in vogue in today's vocabulary, those were the ones he was using in 2014. And I just want to mention that all our experience of CII, what we found in Indian Railways, none of the private and public sector enterprises could match. They were just way ahead. The conversion into GreenCo was a great thing because they cut down carbon emission, they reduced their water consumption, they did all the right things. But what was beautiful was the Indian Railways today, based on the 50 workshops and 10 plants of Indian Railways, and stations are still coming in, they save more than 200 crores rupees every year because of getting green, thereby establishing a clear business case for green, where we used to normally say, please become green, become climate sensitive. There's a business case, and I think Mr. Prabhu was one of our champions for this. Sir, to use a railway language, you put the Indian Railways on the right track, wave the green flag, as we say, Hari Jhandi di aapne, put them on the right traction, and finally, they're traveling at some phenomenal speed in the green journey. Ladies and gentlemen, This is Mr. Suresh Green Prabhu for you. Now, before we get on to the specifics, sir, for the benefit of my panelists and the audience, I do want to update, and of course, you're going to cover the Indian journey. I do want to update. It's important for us to understand the international context on this subject. Climate change has been a matter of great discussions on various forums, and we got evidence even yesterday. So I'll just talk about some key landmarks. The Paris Agreement in 2015, which everybody talks about, was the first landmark meeting where all the global communities agreed that we must reduce the temperature increase to 2 degrees centigrade. One of the heart of the Paris Agreement was that the concept of nationally determined contribution, NDC as they were called, every country was supposed to draw up its NDC, submit it, and review it. That was the major landmark. That was in 2015. Then came interesting years. The US said, Mr. Trump's decision, yes, no, I will not, full yo-yos. And finally, COP26, UN conference happened in Glasgow in 2021. In 2021, everybody conveyed their disappointment on the lack of progress, and the seriousness of global warming was brought out once again. The target of 1.5 degrees centigrade was reaffirmed at Glasgow. There was a need to come to net zero carbon dioxide emissions by around 2050. There was agreement on less usage of coal and hydrocarbons, and there was also a talk of $100 billion per year contribution coming from development. This is in the right of green justice that we heard earlier today. Not much had happened, but they said, let's put an individual target of 2030. Then finally, 3 months later at Egypt, we had the COP27 UN conference. Once again, they sat and said, my God, nothing much is happening. However, the only thing they could salvage in that meeting was the creation of a loss and damage funding mechanism. So we have a situation where not many things have moved exactly what they want to, but however, we still have a reality that these things need to be done as early as possible. Let's look at the positive side, and I want to conclude here with the positive sides. More than 130 countries have set targets for net zero, India as being one of them. Many local initiatives have happened on renewable energy, hydrogen, nuclear power, etc. And we have also some very, very positive leads being taken. The India story, and which is what Mr. Prabhu is going to talk about, is a bright star in the sky. And we'll have a meteor like Mr. Prabhu talk about it. So I will stop here and say, sir, you have walked the talk all your life. Please talk the walk today for us. We want to hear your journey and we want to see how you're doing it. Sir, I just want to conclude. There'll be no summing up. Because how do you sum up a speaker whose every word is a multiplier? I mean, you can't sum up multiplication like this, which is what Mr. Prabhu is, every very powerful speaker. So we will listen to you. And friends, thereafter, we'll come to the next phase of this discussion. Floor is all yours, sir.
So thank you, my dear friend Pradeep. Actually, you have really set a very good tone in terms of setting what are the real issues involved. So it has made my task very easier. But I will just put some few points. How much time you have? I have to speak for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. How much time I have to speak?
25 minutes, please. Thank you.
Sorry?
25 minutes, please. Thank you.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Thank you, sir.
So, thank you. So, thank you for this great opportunity to interact with such bright people. Pune International Center has always been organizing some fantastic events. And this one, I would say, is probably one of the best that goes on every year. And Pune being the center where the real thinking goes on, we call it a Vidyanagari, the city for knowledge, city of enlightenment, city of thinking, the thinking city. So in such a city, we are all the bright people anyway. And to bring the best of those brightest, I think this is a very good forum, and I'm very happy that I could also join you, though not in person, unfortunately, but at least virtually. So thank you very much for this great opportunity. So let us look at some few realities of life. The climate change is no longer a subject which can be discussed in theory, in education institutions, and as I always say, as we used to always do, discussing environment over cocktail parties was one of the very favorite pastime of all of us. But now the time has gone beyond it now. The reality has really dawned on us. As Pradeep was saying, Pune is warming up, but so is the rest of the world. We have seen in this particular year the temperatures recording highest ever, and that's every year this is happening. The previous year was the highest, and now this year is even breaking that record. And interestingly, and that's the area of confusion which people talk about, and I think that's why we are talking about is climate change the reality, and let's put the context into it, is that sometimes climate change is called as global warming, which is true. And that's what Pradeep was talking about. Pune is warming like most of the cities. But also at the same time, this year we have seen that in some part of the world, in the North America, the temperature dropped to such alarming levels that almost that part where it happened was freezing. And then people question, how do you say that it's global warming, where it is so much of cold all over? It's no longer snow, the ice is covered all over. And are we back into the ice age? But just imagine, this happened within few hours, the temperature dropped by some 20, 30 degrees. And then it was freezing. And then again, it went up. So I want to tell you, and that's why the reality and the hoax part of it. There have been one largest world's energy company, which is to always prove, using their huge financial muscle, that climate change is a hoax. They always spend billions, probably over a period of last several decades, billions of dollars to prove that what science was telling is not right. Because you can always have a contrary view, and you can always prepare a modeling to disprove a claim only to suit your own interest. That's what they were trying to do. So those now they are proved because of the information right, what we call right to information in India, the freedom of right in law in US. They found out that this particular company always knew that climate change is real, but it spent a lot of money. The question is then, when you call it global warming, how can then be a cold like this? The science has always said that climate change is going to result into temperatures going up for sure, but also unusual weather patterns. There will be a lot of rains coming in for some time, and there will be no rain for a long time. I remember in 1998, I was a Minister of Environment and Forest. And in a discussion in the Parliament, one very good friend of mine, a member of Parliament, asked me this particular question. He said, you are talking about climate change and the water scarcity, etc., etc. And last 3 years, we have been having bumper rains, which have resulted into floods. I said, my dear friend, that's exactly the problem. That rains will come at a time when they are not supposed to be. And rains will come in such intensity, such ferocity, in such quantity that we never expected. And then they will just disappear for a long time to come. And that kind of a situation we cannot deal with. So today, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change exactly warned us that climate change might result into varying temperatures, varying incredible possibilities, natural disasters of a magnitude that we cannot even imagine, and the colossal loss that will cause will be beyond our comprehension. That was what they always said. So my dear friend Pradeep has correctly pointed out that today the temperature rise is a consequence of human-induced climate change. The consequence of increased temperature will be in varying forms, in terms of floods, in terms of snowfall, and different kinds of things. So what is important is, therefore, climate change is real, which every person in the world is experiencing in varying degrees. Those who live in some part of the world, like in some part of Scandinavia, they may be seeing more warming. The people who are living in the warmer part may be seeing even more cooling. But all of that has resulted into some unimaginable negative consequences on human life. And human is a cause of it, and human is suffering from it. But are the humans only suffering? Is that they the only, because as we would always say, at least in India, we believe the karma theory, that if you do your own action, then you suffer from your own action. But are we the only sufferers from our own action? We are causing damage to the whole planet, to the biodiversity. And most of the terrestrial biodiversity is on the verge of extinction, and now even the marine biodiversity is under serious threat. So just imagine the climate change is reality of the climate change is experienced by multitude of people, all kinds of living beings on this planet in varying degrees, all part of the world. And as my dear friend Pradeep said, climate change is truly an international issue for a reason that you cannot say that I close my door and then close my door and therefore I will not face any problem because outside there's a lot of commotion. I will close my house door and therefore the problem is outside. I will not suffer from it. Climate change is not like that. You have no door to close. You have no windows which can actually help you to escape from this reality of climate change. When oceans are tied to one another, and if the climate change is going to result into increase in temperature, therefore more melting of glaciers, more melting of glaciers will add to more sea level rise. All the seas of the world will then therefore be affected. All the skies of the world are connected to one another. So if the temperature is going up, more greenhouse gas is going up, and it's trapped in the space, all of us will go to affected. So it's no longer a question of nationalities getting affected. It is no longer a question of geographies getting affected. All races, all people, all kinds of living beings are going to be affected. So people say it's the greatest leveler. But leveler, I hope it's not going to level us to a level where we'll never be able to rise again. And therefore, climate change is a reality. It is no longer a hoax, not an academic discussion. And therefore, we must really, really, really come out of it. And that's proved. What was the situation before industrial evolution? What happened subsequent to that? How human action has contributed to it? Let's not waste our time and energy because anyway, there's no time left for us to discuss it. To whether it's a reality or a hoax, that's what some people want to do it only for their commercial interest, for their priorities that they know will actually, they will repent it ultimately at the right time. But I'm just saying, therefore, let's focus on what is that we need to do on climate change and the consequences that we are suffering from. How do you deal with that? So there are many aspects to it. But let me just take one or two of them because I know the time is limited. So Pradeep mentioned some individual action is also necessary. It is that why we need then, if the individual action is necessary, why do we meet in various COPs? The first COP I attended at leading India's delegation was COP4 in Buenos Aires in 1998. And that time itself, I told my friends, I said, my dear friends, politicking is an inevitable part of any global negotiation. But I think we have passed that time beyond politicking. It's now no longer possible that we can just pass the buck from one to another, putting ball into others' courts. It's not going to help us. So why global action necessary? For a reason that unless the global temperatures have to fall, as I was saying, because of interconnectivity of each other's lives, we are not going to result into the consequences. To bring it down below 1.5 degrees centigrade, we'll have to put the load of the particulate matter in the environment maybe below 500 or 530, whatever, that will actually allow us to have a level of comfort. But if you want to reduce that at that level, that means have the global action necessary. But now the question of the paradox is, as the life is always full of paradoxes, the global action alone has to happen. That's the manifestation of local action. What is global action ultimately? Does you mean that some global place will find out and we take some action and therefore the globe will benefit? We have to have the combination, the culmination, the aggregation of all the action at national level is going to result into global action. And how do you then bring in national action? Unless individual entities in those individual nationalities, national countries, they work together, it's not going to happen. And therefore, what Pradeep gave an example of railway is a very classic case. When we actually made a case, we told people that we'll be able to save something like, you'll not believe it, something like $3 to $4 billion over a period of time. People started laughing. What nonsense you're talking? How is it possible? The government anyway doesn't talk about savings. We always felt that savings, cost cutting is something that has to be left to the private sector. We have a right, sovereign right to spend as much as we want, and therefore we'll not talk about savings. In any case, the saving as a government is also rarity. As you know, the national savings rate of any country comes from aggregation of domestic saving, corporate saving, and the government saving. But government always dissaves. Even the US is the classic case, the largest economy. where the public debt to GDP ratio is 150%. So you can imagine how much is the fiscal deficit. And when the fiscal deficit, that means government is not saving, but negative saving. But anyway, so savings as the concept is not very liked by the government. But we said we'll do that. And the railways, we save that much. So just imagine, by saving that much, we cut the emission. But as I made the speech in the parliament, I presented two budgets in the parliament. So what I'm saying today is already available in public domain. One can just log in and can download my speech and can know. And what Pari was saying is the reality of experiences that we all put into public domain as to how that can be done. So just imagine, all of us put together, put a target of making it happen. So this is, I always said, that human beings are the cause of the climate change. Human beings must be the part of the solution of the climate change. They should develop ideas as to how do we actually abate it, how to reduce the emission, and then further we should go about it. All of this, people collectively thought, and my dear friend Sharma, who was the chair of COP27 in Glasgow, Alok Sharma, Alok had come to meet me in Delhi when I was handling G20 and G7. And he tells me, Suresh, what is that we need to do? I said, my dear friend, you have done a great job of going around and trying to convince people. So you are an evangelist. That's a great job you are doing. I personally feel that try to do it in such a way that we take more ambitious target, but also realistic target. Ambition is a good idea, but the ambition and therefore that what goes with that is the hope should not result into hoax. That's why we must work in a proper manner. Now let me explain when I'm saying so. First, we have to reduce emission, and therefore this target that we are trying to set for net zero, etc., are the right thing to do. But let me explain to you the effect of that. First, net zero, and I just wrote an article on it some time back, where I had said net zero is everybody wants to be a hero. And in that, I hope that the net result will not be a big zero. What is the meaning of that? Is that net zero, first, we are setting target 2050 or something beyond immediate future. But that's fine. You cannot just, in any case, you cannot reduce it overnight. That's fine. So, but by postponing a commitment to a later date, we don't have a capability to understand the consequence. Because by the time we reach that level, at that point of time, there will not be any time span left. So first and foremost, we must have some measurable, very significant measurable milestones every year after year to ensure that the world is actually reducing emission over a period of time. Of course, in Paris Accord, we have said that. Also, we had again said that in as late as in COP27 and even in Egypt, we also talked about it. But even before that, the entire United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is an umbrella convention, umbrella agreement, umbrella framework, where we had talked about it. But what has the result? We always had a Kyoto Protocol, where we have said we have a reduction target and we should try to therefore do that. And what is the consequence? The temperature has since risen more than what they were before we signed either the protocol or the convention. So I personally therefore feel that net zero is a right idea, but at the same time, unless we actually convert it into some measurable milestones year after year, have some stringent measures for not actually adhering to it, we are really heading for an imminent disaster. And as I said, we are seeing the consequences of climate change all around us, and therefore we cannot afford to do it anymore. That's one part of it. The second part is that what is today's climate change is happened because of past emissions. What is the meaning of this? The past emissions are causing today's climate change. It is not today's emissions which is causing climate change today. The today's emission will cause whatever impact it will have is for the future. So, and which always again the science has proved, and also to the IPCC, that probably what we are seeing in the environment today in the emission, they will remain there even if we bring it to zero today for another 40, 50 years. So what would it mean? That even when we net zero, the past emissions are even going to cause some changes and adverse changes. So what we really need to do? We have to work on net zero, sure, but also because the emissions are irreversible to some extent for at least 4-5 decades, in that case, we must have an adaptation plan. If we don't have the adaptation to reality of climate change, we'll have a huge consequences of that, particularly in the developing countries, of a magnitude we cannot imagine. In 1999, I published a white paper under the leadership of then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee as the Minister of Environment. We came out with a white paper on environment in which I had said 6% is the cost of adaptation to climate change at a time when the India's economy was growing at the same rate. So just imagine if the consequence of climate change is resulting into a net loss to the economy of a magnitude of 5-6% of GDP, and that too was a very conservative estimate because we are in the government, we met that. Where are we growing and what is heading? So the point Mr. Pradeep said is that we have to also make sure that the consequences of climate change in terms of economic loss or economic negativity, how do you actually make sure it happens? Because countries like India, now today, this year, Prime Minister's greatness and his magnanimity has resulted into almost 828, 30 billion people getting free food. That means that many people need support of the state to ensure that they'll have at least a living. And just imagine that climate change is going to result into the consequences going beyond their capability to deal with it. What could be the consequence of that on India and other developing countries' economy? So we must have a very robust adaptation plan in place. And therefore, while we work on net zero, we also have to have a proper understanding about how do you, for the next 3-4 decades, how do you make sure that we have a very robust climate change, the plan for adaptation in place. So to do this, we also need something else to be done very quickly. And that the cause of climate change is technology. That's what industrial revolution is all about, the first industrial revolution. And now we need technologies to reverse the adverse consequence. So world must come together. And there I see no action on that, which I've been saying when I was leading India's delegation from the last 25, 26 years, not all the time, but in between. And when I said that we must bring technology together by having a similar organized effort that we did in IPCC, which was the scientists coming together for only finding out the cause of climate change. Why not another body of scientists coming together to develop the kind of technology that we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, but also to work on adaptation-related technologies, which will ensure that poor, who are the worst sufferers of climate change, will at least have some decency, of some right to have a decent life. Can we work on that? Should we not do that? I think I'm saying this is the time of thinking that we must trigger in a place like Pune, where we always thought about bigger idea. We always thought about enlightened thinking to address so many challenges that we have faced in the past. Pune is a place which can actually, Vidyanagari means, of course, the knowledge city, but more importantly, the Vidya is for Vidya Vinay Shobhata. We say always that Vidya is the one which really works well only when we have the ability to bow down to the reality and therefore accept it. I think we must work on this possibility of how can the world community work very quickly on adaptation as well as mitigation technologies by collective efforts, by bringing corporate sector, by bringing scientific community, by bringing the governments together. One part of that is money, and therefore that's one thing. One good part is that rich countries are never poor in terms of offering ideas. They always say 100 billion, 20 billion. So they are very good in that. So that richness is reflected in terms of commitment of a higher and higher amount of money. Unfortunately, that kind of commitment does not translate into reality. So that money is one part which has never been seen but has been talked about. But I hope today, this time, at least we can work together, bring brain power together, bring intellectual capital together to save natural capital. And that's something the least we can do. And therefore, that's one thing that can actually be the only correct response to dealing with the threat of climate change, which is now staring at us. And we are the ones who have created it. We are the ones we are suffering from it. I hope we are the only ones who will actually address it in an appropriate response to deal with the challenges by saving ourselves to begin with and also saving the rest of the world. I hope we do that. And my dear friend Pradeep is the right person to chair this session. He has this bright idea intellectually, but also a real committed person to actually drive it to reality as he has done in his all businesses. What we really need is intellectual honesty, the commitment to the cause in the reality, and I hope the world rises to this new expectation from them. And I think this particular program that we organized for the last 2 days will result into some concrete action towards a sustainable future for each one of us. Thank you, my dear friend, for inviting me. I wish I could have been there because I could have learned so much from the great participants that are all attending this program. The loss is mine, but I'm sure all of you will gain in terms of confidence that this conference has resulted into some promising future for all of us. Thank you very much.
Sir, thank you so much, sir. I said I won't sum up, पर सच में दिल से आपका शुक्रिया क्योंकि आप दिल से बोले. You know, this is something which really comes out like from a karma yogi and a visionary. Thank you so much, sir. We deeply appreciate your time. Really wish you were with us. I'm sure there'll be a next time, sir. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, sir.
Thank you very, very much,
And
Mr.
congratulations
Suresh
once
Prabhu.
again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your frank, honest lecture, for that sobering reality. And I think for giving us so much to think about and introspect. We are grateful. Mr. Bhargav will now chair a session on meeting climate targets, the road ahead, featuring the following in-person panelists. Ms. Neha Mudliar, Country Representative, India, Global Green Growth Institute, and Ms. Wendy Werner, Country Manager, IFC, India. Dr. Ashok Sarkar, Program Leader, Infrastructure and Senior Energy Specialist, World Bank, will join them online. Inviting panelists to the stage, please.
Good evening again. I can see some uneasiness, but you're going to live with me for another 60 minutes. I'll try, but the good news about this second session is that you have the hangover of an outstanding, passionate, and a very action-oriented conversation with Mr. Suresh Prabhu, who is quite a doyen in this field. The other good news is that I have with me 3 panelists. 2 charming ladies are already here. The gentleman, Dr. Ashok's, is he on the line? Yeah, he's watching us from Jerusalem, and he's going to be the 3rd panelist. Deep gratitude to both of you and to Ashok for being with us today. I'll very quickly share with the audience the flow of program that 4 of us had discussed earlier. So to start with, I need to justify my sitting here, so I will use the first 6 to 7 minutes to set the context and put some posers, overall posers for each one of you. Thereafter, I'm going to request each of the panelists to give their thoughts on the subject. I mean, they've been listening to others, they've been seeing the session earlier. What are their thoughts on this subject? The subject being meeting climate targets, the road ahead. I think targets are clear. They will tell us on this road, how would the traffic be? What are the potholes? What are the speed breakers? What are the speed limits? What are the traffic nuisance? As you talk about the road, what you and your institutions are going to do. Thereafter, I'm proposing a very interesting thing. Instead of me asking questions, each of my panelists will spend 3 minutes each and react to what the other 2 panelists have said. So thereby, Neha will react to what Wendy and Ashok is going to talk about. So that way, instead of individual speeches, is going to be a panel discussion. We're going to try it out. That will take us about 10 minutes. And finally, there will be 10 to 15 minutes of questions. My request to each one of you is to be precise with your questions. I can assure you our panelists will give you a very crisp answer too. And that is the plan for the next 60 minutes. I do want to take the opportunity of providing some overall inputs which are important for all of us here. So we had yesterday the 3 honorable ministers talk about the subject of Asia Economic Dialogue, which is what we are discussing. Neha, you were there. Wendy, you and Ashok were there. And Mr. Bambawale had asked them very clearly that tell us 3 things. He asked the same question to all 3 of ministers. Tell us 3 things that keep you anxious and awake. Believe me, the one subject which all 3 of them very clearly articulated was climate change. So here are the 3 national leaders who said what keeps them awake is climate change. So I think that's important for us to acknowledge. And here's another input which I want to give to you. 2 out of those ministers from Maldives and from Bhutan, Wendy said, we hear about climate financing, we hear about green credit, but they said we find as we get on to taking it, there's no difference between a green credit and any other credit. We are not getting any concessional interest rate. We are not getting anything. They said this is, I mean, words of mine. This is only about green bucks. There are no green strings for green climate. So there is, we were surprised. So maybe you can address the thing because this was a point which came out. I think Ashok, you from World Bank and Wendy from IFC would be able to clarify because both these ministers, mind you, they were finance ministers, were making this point loud and clear. So that's one input. Second, I think Mr. Prabhu has already covered that there are no boundaries in climate change. I mean, he put it across very, very, very clearly. When the sea level rises, it doesn't distinguish between a rich and a poor country. When there's ozone layer things, it doesn't look at the flag of the country below. Ozone layer causes everybody. And global warming doesn't care. Everything under the sun gets covered. Hence the need for a thing, and this is something that all of you are very sensitive to. The third context point which I want to bring is, anyway, no, it's not the point. You know, at my age, people survive on optimism and escapism. So I was thinking, maybe is it such a serious issue? Are we overstating the case of this climate? Are we making a big song and dance? Is it so serious? Is it so urgent? Mr. Prabhu alluded to it. So what did I do? And this is interesting. I said, in the last 10 days, between 10th and 20th of February, I just picked up two leading newspapers in Pune, Times of India and Indian Express. No, I did not pick up some special environment thing, nor did I pick up BBC World News, just to clarify. These were the things. And I said, let me pick up those headlines which relate to environment. Now, mind you, of course, in Pune newspapers, they are full of our traffic jams, we are full of our cyber thefts and various other strikes. Believe me, in 10 days, there were 6 big headlines, virtually one every day. I'll just read out, it's important for us to understand, and this is the gravity. On 10th February, Indian Express says that January 23 was 0.25 degree warmer than average period of 1991 to 2000. So 0.25 degrees already been talked about. It also said the combined sea ice extent of the Antarctic and Arctic was lower than ever before. And the area where the ice has disappeared is the size of 2 Germanys. So that much area, there's no ice. 15th February, Times of India says, World Meteorological Organization reports sea levels will go up, please hear me carefully, have gone up by 4.5 millimeter per year. That's almost half a centimeter per year between 2013 and 32. It's happening. And as Mr. Prabhu said, it's all because of the past the past sins, etc. Several big cities, including Dhaka, Shanghai, Mumbai, London, New York, are at risk. It goes on to say that even if you control temperature limit to 1.5 degrees, this will continue because, as Mr. Prabhu said, because of the past things. Due to loss of ice cap, over time, Ganges and Brahmaputra will also shrink. And the third was, of course, 20th February, Times of India says, Himalayan snow is turning black and melting faster due to the soot and pollution emitted from biomass. And in lighter vein, if Lord Shiva was on Kailash Parvat, he will be very unhappy with the black soot of the snow around him. But that's the level of what is happening around. So the problem is real. And problem is now. And there's another spin I want to give because again, you people are addressing. There's a data brought out by the journal Nature Climate Change. It says during the last, and they've got from 1991 2020, he says the global warming contributes to 1/3 of the deaths on heat strokes. They've gone up. But it also says, due to global warming, the deaths due to extreme cold weather have also come down, except few stray cases things. So here's how nature plays. Cold climates, deaths due to extreme cold is coming down. Deaths due to heat in hot places is going up. Now, it's not rocket science because the article goes on to say that most of the hot climates are less developed, poor countries in certain regions, and the more developed countries have slightly colder versions. So even in deaths, there is bringing in a thing that poorer nations are suffering more deaths due to global warming. There is something, just the way pandemic happened. Now we're not changing the laws of nature, but something to ponder. However, it's not all bad news, and I'm just going to conclude here. There were this morning there were two positive things in the newspaper. I'm just covering this newspaper just to bring in. There's a statement from Prime Minister Modi urging investors and saying potential of solar, wind, and biogas in India is no less than any gold mine or oil fields. What is he saying? That the potential is high, and of course, gold mine is something that gets Indians attracted very fast. So that's what he's saying. And there's another one from from President Joe Biden when he was nominating Mr. Ajay Banga to lead the bank. The point he made is addressing the impacts of climate change at World Bank is a priority for US. So we have these two positive spins coming. The US president saying, hey, I'm putting this guy because he's good and I want him to look at climate change. Here's Prime Minister Modi saying, hey, we need to do it. So while there is gloom and bad news, there's also a political leadership taking. So with this at the backdrop that the danger is real, all over, we need to have collective actions, and I'm not saying anything profound, this is something that has come across. Here's the time. I would now request my three panelists to pick up from here. May I request you, Wendy, as the first speaker, your guest. While you had IFC's largest client country, which is India, your experience in steering IFC work in Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Asia, Pacific region, I think makes you eminently qualified to write a bestseller on Asia. What happens? So I'm saying you've got an amazing exposure. Do share your thoughts, Wendy, on the financial inclusion, particularly green financing, and do respond to this perception that people have that the enterprises are not getting that preferential treatment that perhaps climate change needs. Floor is yours, your next 9 to 10 minutes. Thank you, Wendy.
Great. Thank you very much, Pradeep, and to the Asian Economic Dialogue and the Pune International Center for having me. So I appreciate the introduction personally, but most importantly, the context setting. We heard from Minister Prabhu as well as Pradeep, the seriousness of the issue, which I think it is, the defining issue of our times with regard to climate change. So I am the country head for the International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector part of the World Bank Group. And that means that we make debt and equity investments in private companies as well as various programs and advisory services to encourage more private investment and how that private investment should be structured to meet development outcomes. So we are always have two kind of important parts. We do have to make a profit based on our shareholders, which our shareholders are all the countries in the world, India being one of our main shareholders, and also to make sure that we are making a strong development impact in all of our investments. And climate, as was just highlighted in the nomination of the potential new World Bank Group president, is a defining kind of objective that has become even more central to the IFC and the World Bank Group in the last year. And we have a quite comprehensive climate action plan across all parts of the World Bank Group. So that I won't necessarily speak exactly to that, but I will give some examples of how IFC looks to mobilize green and financing and what sectors we think are particularly need attention. So I'm not going to spend time on energy. So I will leave that to perhaps Ashok or Neha to cover, partly because that here in India particularly, I think we see that the energy sector is moving quite well, right? The renewables market is quite robust, and there's a lot of continued reforms on battery energy storage. There's offshore wind, so things are happening. But I think one of the areas that doesn't necessarily get as much attention is the overall sort of kind of scenario of how do we improve the livelihoods, the lives, and the growth scenario for developing countries. And India will be the defining country when it comes to whether or not the world can address climate change. Not India by itself, of course, but India, will be the space that we will be able to see whether or not we can meet development goals as well as address climate change. I mean, I just said I wouldn't talk about energy, but just as an indicator, average Indian electricity consumption is around 100 kilowatt. 1,000 kilowatt hours, and that's like less than 20% of what is China, and less than 10% of what is the U.S. So, still Indians need to grow. They need to have more opportunities. Cities need to expand. We see almost every metro area has the metropolitan. The metro, the transit system now being in construction. So it's kind of a joke now that I go to all the cities and see this. But these are the things that need to happen in many developing countries. So that means that we have to look also at the forces of production, manufacturing. For instance, 70% of the steel in the world is produced in emerging markets. And we need to address the carbon intensity of steel, cement, building materials. These are the sort of more fundamental issues that are much more difficult and are going to be very, very important to be able to achieve both development in a way that addresses climate change. And I think was already touched on also that adaptation is a very important part of this equation too. So it's dealing with what is actually happening on a daily basis, along with what the future energy intensity, carbon intensity of our economies and production will be. So I just wanted to highlight how important that sort of decarbonization as a kind of core agenda and adaptation is across all sectors: manufacturing, chemicals, building materials, buildings. Every building we build should be green, for instance. And this is one of the ways that IFC has tried to also embed climate into almost all of our verticals. I think it used to be even 2 years ago. I just started in India a year and a half ago, but one of the things that I started very strongly with, with all of our projects is to say that we don't get to be either green or inclusive or, well-priced and profitable. We must be green, and all the other things can come in. That's wonderful, but green is the foundational, effort that we have to include. And I think overall, there's probably three main kind of areas that I would highlight as a way to catalyze finance for climate. One is the policy side, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail on policy. Maybe we'll come into that a little bit more in the discussion between all the panelists. But the policy framework is important. I think we have some very strong policies coming in here in India and other good examples. But just the indication that we're going towards the net zero by 2070 here, and this also highlights what. The Honorable Minister Prabhu had said about having clear targets, right? But then putting in place the pricing and the policies to ensure that happens. So policy is important. The second is, from the point of the private sector, I think, is to look at more investment platforms, to be mobilizing capital from many different sources. And I'll explain what I mean a little bit about that. But and the third one is really to look at what in the private sector side we call blended finance, which addresses some of the point that was highlighted about whether or not concessional finance is really coming into this space. So I will leave kind of more the public financing side to others to address. But when we use concessional finance, which is very cheap financing for very long term, the type of financing that does go to to the public sector side in some cases from entities like World Bank and ADB. We sometimes now have the ability to use some of that very concessional financing for private sector projects, but only when they are kind of doing something extra beyond what we could kind of motivate and inspire a private sector client to do in the kind of business as usual financing scenario. So this is what we call blended finance, and that can take a lot of different, kind of structural, methods. But this, I think, is very, very important because, we can see a lot of businesses now that will start to increase the amount of renewables in what they do, but then they get to a point where maybe the technology is not proven, it starts to be more expensive, it starts to be more time consuming or difficult in how their operations are run, and how do you get over that hump? So blended finance, we feel, is one of the tools that India needs to mobilize much more, and there needs to be much more blended finance available for middle-income countries where climate is going to be the defining feature.
Maybe another minute only.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and I just wanted to highlight, I think, just a few examples of some of the things that have happened. IFC has been doing, but many others, to kind of mobilize this sort of financing. And a lot of those really are kind of either co-investment vehicles and facilities, or using capital markets, right? Because we can hear, I mean, along with all those announcements about the temperatures and the ice caps, there's also every day in the newspaper that there's another equity fund that's devoting $1 billion to India. So there is funding out there, but we need to help to guide that funding into more green projects and make sure we have green projects that are certified and are clearly, can be monitored for their outcomes. So one of the things that IFC started quite some years ago is this sort of green bonds, but we also 2 years ago started doing more sustainability linked bonds, which means multiple different indicators of targets over time about climate, but also about sustainability, other issues of sustainability and employment, for instance. And then another area is in blue finance. So between those two areas, we've done more than $2.2 billion on both blue finance, which is focused on plastics and water, and also sustainability linked just in the last 2 years, and more than almost $9 billion in the last 10 years or so on green finance. So I think there is a lot of funds out there, and there's more we can talk about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry to be impolite. Thank you so much for bringing out that a financial institution also needs to make money, but you're giving a focus on climate change. And green is fundamental. So Ashok, please remember, the onus passes on to you because she says she does finances private sector, you finance the state. So you can be a little more liberal, but we'll come to you, Ashok. But before I get to Ashok, Neha, you had a fascinating journey in your young life career. Hardcore finance to green finance, business development to CSR, national to international, urban to rural, west and east. My God, you package a lot. You've seen all over. Help us give your thoughts. And I think this is a point that I have personally gone through, etc. People make it a choice. Is it growth versus environment? Does Vikas need to Vinash? Does development necessarily lead to destruction? Can we not have both Vikas and no Vinash? Can we have development without destruction? And I think your thoughts, and again, just be sensitive to the time. You've got 7 minutes.
Sure. Thank you very much. Very honored to be part of this distinguished panel. Very, very glad that this is the first panel where we have 50% women representation. So again, and very happy to be with my ex-colleagues. Wendy and Dr. Ashok, which is a sister entity of IFC. So I think, we've had multiple discussions over the last 2 days, and I think over the last 2-3 years, right, across multiple international forums. I think it is very, very heartening to see that climate has finally taken center stage. I would just put 2 points before I start. There is a lot of climate anxiety. People are talking about a lot of, Honorable Minister, Mr. Prabhu mentioned about erratic weather conditions. And if you look at the data, there were 314 extreme weather conditions in India, 314 days of extreme weather conditions in India, only in 2021. If you look at the loss to GDP, it was about 5.4% of GDP lost primarily due due to climate change, adverse effects of climate change. And we lost about 167 billion days of labor. So these are very stark data out there. But let's move beyond anxiety to action. Another theme which we saw across the board was our responsibility in climate change versus global responsibility, global south versus global north. But we also heard this again and again, and as we are all aware, climate is a global issue. So let's move beyond confrontation to cooperation. This is a problem we will all have to solve together. So with that, I'll briefly talk about the institute which I represent, which is Global Green Growth Institute. It's a one-of-a-kind intergovernmental international organization which has been formed to fight climate change. We have about 45 member countries. The way we operate is we are embedded within the ministries of these governments to help these governments achieve the NDCs which they have all committed to, in Glasgow, but even before that in the Paris Accord. If you look at the themes that we operate in, it is across the board. I think we spoke about, and Pradeep ji mentioned, across energy, but other sectors. So if you look at the work we do, we work across 6 thematic areas. We look at energy, we look at transportation, we look at waste and circular economy. We look at green buildings. We look at gender and inclusiveness because I think, like Wendy, Pradeep ji also mentioned, we have to look at an inclusive growth and development model. And India's energy consumption is significantly lower than the globe, and we are facing some very deep developmental challenges as well. So as we scale up our economy, we do not want this to be at the expense of environment. So definitely we look at gender and inclusiveness. And finally, we look at forests and landscapes. So those are the key thematic areas we look at. In India, we have projects across green hydrogen, which we're working in collaboration with the World Bank. We have power sector reforms, which we are looking at in the state of Himachal Pradesh. We have also been instrumental in doing the largest floating solar project of about 600 megawatts in the state of Madhya Pradesh. We're working across energy efficiency and landscape restoration. So we're really looking across the board at multiple sectors in India. I think, like Pradeep ji mentioned, and our Honorable Prime Minister mentioned, this is a great opportunity for India to be a leader in climate change. And I think the 4 or 5 key points which are extremely positive in climate change coming from India. One, Wendy mentioned about policy. I think we've seen this with the green hydrogen mission. We've seen with the recent budget, which announced almost $4.2 billion to be targeted towards climate. We've seen India taking on international ownership in climate with the International Solar Alliance, with the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. So there are a number of positives which we've seen from the policy side. One thing which Pradeep ji you mentioned about, and the government, the finance ministers yesterday of Bhutan and Maldives mentioned, was the cost of financing. And a very recent example of this is India's sovereign green bond. India had this sovereign green bond of $2 billion. And this actually came at a 5 basis points reduction compared to the risk-free return of India. So we are already seeing investors out there which are giving a benefit if you are doing green. And you put this in the context of rising interest rates, you put this in the context of possible global recession and increased fuel prices, this makes even more, this is even more remarkable that despite all these things, we are able to raise funding at reduced prices. I think the second thing, which is really very, very encouraging is, and a lot of, we've not seen this mentioned, but I personally have really experienced this, is the youth and startup ecosystem in India. I am investing in 3 companies in climate, where the founders are less than 30 years old. And I have seen this again and again. I think the youth in the country is very focused, and in the world is very focused on climate. And in India, we have a very, very thriving startup ecosystem, and I do really believe that this will come at the forefront as we are looking at innovations in climate. There are a number.
Just a minute more.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of challenges, there are about 3-4 key challenges, I think. Of course, financing. So if you look at the financing for India to meet our 2030 targets, that would be about various estimates, but it's about $2.4 trillion. If you translate that into annual requirement, that's about $170 billion a year. We get only about $18 billion a year. So there is a big gap there. There is a big gap with regard to, I mentioned the youth and the startup, but there is a requirement to promote climate technopreneurship in India and have the ecosystem for innovation and deep tech, which needs to be in collaboration with industries and with educational institutions. And finally, there is the need for technology transfer. There are a number of technologies in the electrolyzer space, in the green hydrogen space, in innovative carbon capture utilization space, which is available with developed countries, and we do need that kind of technology transfer and capacity building to happen in India. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Neham. Again, I'm impolite, but I had to, the time things. No, what you said is just not climate anxiety, it's climate reality. From what the numbers you said, we need to be conscious. Being inclusive is a pitch that you made, linking it to the government efforts, and finally, we need more energy, but we are an energetic nation, particularly with youth energy, so I'm sure we'll get this. So Ashok, you can hear us? Wow, we can see the city of Jerusalem behind you.
I can hear you.
Ashok, before you start, let me just, for the benefit of things, you're an amazing person in terms of, he has worked in companies like BHL here, very grounded, and he's also, of course, worked all over the place. And he's at a location where there's never a dull moment. Besides climate change, there are lots of things happening around him all the time. Long innings with the World Bank. And Ashok would certainly want you as a large multilateral public funding institution, how do you think, particularly from finance, you can address it? Unfortunately, there's just 8 minutes for you. If you can fast forward your thing. Thank you so much for being there.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me check. Can you hear me, Pradeep? Good. Again, thanks a lot. And it's really an honor and privilege to be invited to such an august audience. The Asia Economic Dialogue has been around for quite some time, and I really feel very humbled in the august presence of such stalwarts. We had Mr. Prabhu and other honorable ministers speak prior to this session. And of course, thankful to Pradeep ji and Ambassador Bambawale and others who have invited me to join this panel. It's of course difficult to follow panel members like Wendy and Neha because they have covered pretty much what I wanted to say perhaps, and I'll have to be articulate enough to make it different from there. But let me make an attempt to make a few points that are kind of based on not just my India experience, which has been quite extensive in the last 10 years, particularly with the energy efficiency sector in India, but also my experience in other countries and other similar countries in the world. And again, my opinions are personal here because I no more work formally in India. But on the other hand, you know almost everything about World Bank. It's been in the news in the recent days and weeks, quite a bit. Every newspaper and every LinkedIn message is about the bank. But I'll make my best attempt to cover all those points. But let me begin by thinking, basically your point, Pradeepji. You mentioned about this, climate financing getting attention worldwide as well as in India. The newspapers talking about it, everybody talking about it. It's true. But what has happened, in my opinion, is much of the debate, much of the work has been on the mitigation aspects of climate change. Very little has been done on adaptation, which is one area where you would have to do something very quickly as well, because otherwise the Earth is already heating up. The planet is going to end up by the end of this century at maybe 4 degrees Celsius high. In spite of all the net zero and other commitments we have, and if you look at the reality, we will have a few degrees Celsius higher no matter what we do, which means that we need to adapt. We need to make the systems more resilient. We need to make policies and investments in that space as well. Because at the end of the day, it's the poor people, many of them in India and around the world, even in places like which are as vulnerable where I am in Palestine, there are situations where climate is definitely going to affect. It's already started affecting, as you rightly said, the floods, the earthquakes, etc., are somehow getting linked to that. So I think that's one thing which I think we will have to latch on to. Thankfully, the global community issued the adaptation fund approval in the last conference of parties at Sharm el-Sheikh. And that actually really opens the opportunity for many of the countries like India to tap into that fund and see what can be done to bring in the private sector for, as Wendy was saying, through guarantees, through risk mechanisms, through other insurance policies, etc., to have the adaptation actions as well in action mitigation. The other thing, which is I also think needs more attention than just reducing fossil fuels, is the issue of carbon sinks. Now, 9.5 billion tons of emissions are coming out globally from fossil fuels. 50% of that are absorbed by either forests or oceans, right? That's a natural ecosystem. That's the natural way the Earth has been operating for, since it has existed. What happens is that when you cut down forests, when you have forest fires, what has been happening in the last decade, half of that absorbed CO2 is going back into the atmosphere, which means carbon sinks need to be preserved. Forests need to be preserved. The afforestation needs to be done. Deforestation needs to be stopped around the world, in addition to what we are doing on the fossil fuel side. And that's when so what we call the carbon sources and carbon sinks, both have to be looked at. Adaptation and mitigation both have to be looked at. Now, in my less than maybe 3 minutes left, let me try to come back to the nitty-gritties of what I think. Being an engineer, I like to be more objective and not philosophical. And that's why I have this, what we call the 5 I's, the 5 integration pillars of climate change. Number 1 I is it goes beyond sector integration. We have to look at energy, transport, water, urban together, along with digital connection. Only then we're able to come up with optimal solutions. Otherwise, if you look at it sectorally in a siloed manner, it will always be suboptimal. And you'll always need more money, which will always be used up wastefully. So one has to think in a very integrated manner in terms of financing, technology, regulations, tariffs, pricing, etc., etc. Look at electric vehicles. What does it do? It combines electricity, transport, and digitalization together, right? Those are the kind of things we need to push, because if you think about only doing transport sector planning or energy sector planning, you'll come up with solutions. Great. It will all have good payback periods. But would the business model be the best business model? Would the paybacks be the best paybacks amongst all the options you have? Would you have the ultimate outcome and impact, which is really good for everybody? So I think that's how I call it the number I integration. What is I number 2? Integration number 2 is what Wendy was talking about. Public-private integration should not stay at a technical level or a project level or a partnership level, what we typically call the PPPs. What we have to do, and that's where the World Bank comes in, because if you think about the estimated numbers, in developing countries, IEA came out with a number that we need to quadruple the clean energy investment to $1 trillion per year. Now, today, to give the reference point, you have less than $200 billion being spent by all public spending and the World Bank and IFC included. World Bank's share, and I think it's World Bank Group or World Bank share is around $30 billion per year. That 30 billion is not going to magically solve the 1 trillion problem. You have to bring in the private sector in a much, much bigger way. There's a lot of capital locked in the private sector. Think about the US treasury bonds and the Indian system. There's a lot of private capital. All that has to be unlocked into channeled into climate change actions. I just going to get 2 more minutes, Pradeepji. Integration number 4 is linking technical opportunities with business models. We always think technology is going to solve the problem. No, we have to have a business model which goes with the technology. Otherwise, you can talk about fancy technologies, but if people are not making money, nobody's going to invest in those. And you need business models to make money. And final integration is across borders. And that's where our colleagues from the Foreign Service here, I know many of the Foreign Service colleagues, very reputed names, are part of the Asia dialogue, economic dialogue. Regional integration and regional interconnections, what we have seen working in the Gulf countries, in Middle East, in Latin America, in Africa, also in Asia to some extent between the Central Asia and India and Bangladesh, etc., need to be revamped more. Because it is a global problem, as Neha was saying, a lot of the solutions are in the global domain, and that has to be brought in. I have a lot more things to say, but everybody knows about what India has done. I don't want to go through those lists. I started working in India when NMEEE was being done for energy efficiency mission, which has been very successful in India. Right now, we are talking about the hydrogen mission, and the bank is involved in everything, in e-mobility mission, in the renewable energy 200 gigawatt target mission. And the World Bank, of course, is very, very closely involved with all the partners, and we are part of that. And I think, so therefore, my final point, I have great optimism in the youth of India. India is the youngest population in the world. We need to rely on them. I think climate change is a problem created by our generation, but our younger generation, next generation, actually knows what the solutions are. They don't want to buy fancy cars like we did. They don't want to live in big houses. They prefer Ubers and Olas over buying individual cars. And I think we need to latch on to that. Let us give the skills to the younger generation so that they are the ones who will take India to the next golden age. And I put all my bets on my own motherland. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much, Ashok. Really appreciate the energy, the word you talked about, adaptation. And you talked about the carbon sinks. The day before, yesterday, the minister from Bhutan said they have got 76% of their land and forest, they are net negative. And he said their constitution doesn't allow them to put at least 60% thing. You're absolutely right, that's a solution. On your 5 eyes, lots of we's here agree with your 5 eyes, and that's very, very clearly. I feel a little awkward here. Neha, you all talk about youth. Gautam is not going to let me sit on the panel next time because they're all talking about youth making a contribution, but that was in lighter vein. Now, friends, I'm looking at the watch and I'm also looking at Shilpa, trying to. We have only 12 minutes left, right? Now, may I suggest something? Instead of sort of thing, I'll request each of our panelists, and believe me, give you just exactly a minute to say your word. So all 3 of you give your 1 minute speech. And after that, we'll have about 10 minutes for the audience questions. And I think this telling each other, we'll do over coffee. So Ashok, I'll start with you first. 1 minute of what you would want in this. What is our agenda? Agenda is meeting climate targets, the road ahead. What do you suggest for this road in 1 minute?
Thanks a lot. And again, based on what I have heard this morning or this session, and what I've seen, I think, the road ahead is quite, I would say, challenging. It's not going to be an easy road ahead, but I think it also needs to be a very comprehensive action roadmap. One has to look at policies, one has to look at financing together, one has to look at behavioral change. You look at Prime Minister Modi announced the LIFE program, right? The Lifestyle and Environment program. We need that kind of program to tag along with technologies and policies and financing so that then only we can have the right direction in actually achieving a 1.5 degree Celsius planet. And also, I would say, think about jobs and other benefits, particularly for the private sector. Don't think about this as a public good only. It's a private benefit. We are creating jobs by doing climate change. Private sector has already proven that. So I would say that those are the 2 points I have in mind.
Thank you so much, Ashok. Neha?
Thank you very much. I think I will just take forward, what Dr. Ashok mentioned about really the business model for climate. We've seen Blue Smart working very well in Gurgaon and Bangalore. It was not because it's a blue taxi, but it's a taxi which never cancels. So let's look at business models which are integrated with green. Let's look at better products, might not be only green products, but green and better products. And I think we definitely have a solution there. Thank you very much.
Okay, I was looking forward to the questions, but okay, so now no, to questioning them. I guess my message would be is there is a lot of commitments out there. I mean, these are being talked about. I mean, Mr. Prabhu kind of highlighted a little bit of the ironies of getting those trillions of dollars to actually be implemented. But there are billions of dollars that have been committed already. Right? And I'd say, these sorts of platforms that I was talking about, that's just one example, but there's many of them. So I think we need to kind of push to make sure we are putting together the kind of financing at scale. So a lot of the examples we've kind of touched on that are very exciting are fantastic, but they're still small. So we still need that scaling across and the size. And we need to utilize whatever committed financing and concessional financing and blended financing to encourage kind of more innovation and to try new things. At the same time, we have to make it very clear that this becomes a new baseline. And I think, again, RBI and the Indian kind of policies are definitely moving in that direction, and a lot of investors, international investors, are moving in that direction. You're not going to get financing for very dirty industries, going forward from many large international financial sources. So I think the two, it's raise the tide and encourage.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think return on investment is what my 3 colleagues understand. We want to get on to return to nature. Return of nature is as important as return on investment. So now with this, the house is open for questions. I would suggest we'll again take 3. And yes, gentlemen, yeah.
You mentioned about the temperature in Pune, the min-max normally goes at times even 20 or 20 plus. But the other side of the story, which was covered just yesterday or day before by the Indian Express, the traffic index picked up by TomTom, that perhaps Pune, it takes around 24 or 25 minutes to cover 10 kilometers. And one of the day, just perhaps this month, it was even took 34 minutes.
We understand, but what's the point?
So the question is about the ambition and what should be done really outside of financing, so that we mean to change this scenario.
Yeah, the comprehensive. Yeah, the gentleman at the...
Quick question. All of these initiatives, ma'am, that we need to do, and sir, would need ultimately money.
Yeah.
Do you believe that all the governments, if there's a consensus that something needs to be done, are governments really doing something to make the financing easier? Just one quick example, for agriculture, for example, you get loans at 5 because government mandates that kind of financing. So are any governments mandating cheaper financing, banks to lend, funds to lend, something of that sort? Is it happening, or are you seeing something like that on the horizon?
Yeah. Thank you. I won't give the priority to the lady. Yes, please. And we'll take one more question.
Hello, thank you to all 3 of the panelists and of course to the moderator. My question is for Ms. Neha Muralia. I was reading your website just now as you were speaking, and I note that your mission statement says that you are to serve the agenda of both green growth and conservation. And I know that you mentioned briefly in your remarks about some of the exciting investments in those talented people under 30. Could you share with us, because we all know that the youth is our future to save us from ourselves, and so could you share with us, based upon your experience, the most exciting and new investment that's on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I'll just pause. Is anyone from this side? Yeah, again the lady. And yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, regarding the financing rather, is there any instrument in place to check or assess the achievement, achievement of the target?
Okay, I'll pause here. Wendy, would you like to take up the last question? Then Neha, you take up the question in front. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that last question. It was one that I just didn't have time to get to. So I think standards has been an extraordinarily important part of this agenda. So IFC, I'm very honored to work for an organization that has worked hard on having kind of putting out standards and guidelines, agreed with many others on things like impact investing. And we have done the same for blue bonds, green bonds, as well as biodiversity bonds just recently last year. So those exactly identify what kind of targets you have, what are the indicators, and how do you monitor those? And I would emphasize how important that is, because you can say whatever you want at the beginning, and you may even put it in a legal document, but if no one actually follows up and monitors, and course corrects, because we have to learn. I mean, I don't think we'll say that everything's perfect at first. We have to continue to learn. So I think any green financier has to make sure that they have those capacities to monitor. Thank you.
Thanks, Gota. You just very crisply answer what GGI stands for.
Sure. So we're doing a project in landscape restoration where we're looking at the Narmada River, and it's a very interesting project because, like climate change, somebody else is responsible and somebody else pays the burden for it. Including like that, if you look at landscape and restoration, the benefits of that will actually be felt by all of us in the city. So this project, we're working with the tributaries of Narmada, where we're looking at interventions within forests and agricultural lands and around the tributaries of Narmada, and the benefit of that will actually be better, cleaner, and more water for Indore. So this is a payment for ecosystem services. You asked me about investments and startups. I'm happy to take that offline in the interest of time.
Sure. Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Ashok, the gentleman asked questions about government. Are they willing to put the money? You are the one who are closest to the government, even though, because World Bank funding is a lot to state agencies. What's your sense, just not in India, elsewhere? Is the government just giving speeches, or is the government actually putting money there? That's a question.
No, I think that's a very good question, and the answer is limited to what my experience has been with the governments, right? It varies from country to country, and of course in India, what we have seen in the World Bank projects, for instance, there is a requirement that government chips in contribution as well. So none of our projects just go like that without any co-financing from the government. We also try to bring in co-finance from climate funds, like the Green Climate Fund, the Clean Technology Fund, the Global Environment Facility, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the answer is yes, what we've seen, it has done it. But as Neha was saying, $4.3 billion announced by the budget, but India needs $1.5 trillion according to the International Energy Agency. So that $4.3 billion is only going to go that far. So it has to be used in this very sophisticated, smart ways to leverage private sector and to use that 4.3 billion very, very carefully. Use the public money, World Bank money very carefully, and not give out just free money and concessions all the time. For example, energy efficiency does not need concession funds. It's a business model which is behind energy efficiency, which can make it attractive. And it's already happening. In our project, we are already doing that. In one of the projects with Small Industries Development Bank of India, $60 million of energy efficiency we have done just by using little money. Most of it is private money. So I think it all depends upon what business models we are talking about. What are the financial
I think, Ashok, I'll just build on the same thing. It is true that a lot of energy or efficiency, environment-related things have a huge payback. I mean, just to give illustration, in CII, 300 companies which wanted to a green co are saving 3,800 crores rupees a year on an investment of only 3,200 crores. That's a payback of 10 months. And this 3,800 crore is recovering benefit is coming year after year. Ashok is right. Nobody needs to finance that. And I've been using this terminology in CII too, in everything. It's not nice to be green. You're stupid if you're not green. Because there's such a big business case. So there are a whole lot of areas where the business case comes out. Yes, there are some interested, but I think the major theme, and I just want to close it out here, I'm sorry, because I think the reality is we are on a treadmill. Even if we stop things in future, the past as has been coming out is going to haunt us anyway. The next 40 years, we are going to be paying the price for what has been done 40 years earlier, or whatever number of years earlier. So, guys, it's so serious that the least we can do is a damage control, that in future we don't do it. Believe me, this is something which doesn't dawn on us. We look at nice weather and we say, "Arey, chalo, this is what happened yesterday was bad, climate change." So, friends, I just want to close here by thanking my wonderful panelists. They have been able to cut across a wide spectrum of questions uh, or things that you had in mind, and we look forward to a brighter future for our youngsters, because I think it's important that it's really alarming how when you get into it you feel completely, and when you walk out and you say, "Arey, it doesn't hit me today." And that's the challenge with environment. If there is an epidemic, there is a medical problem, you feel the pain immediately and you start attending to it. When you say 4 years later temperature will go down, we'll say we'll see it then. And that's a problem. Thank you very much once again. Thanks, Ashok, for being with us. And next time you're not allowed to come on, think you should come in person. Yeah? Thank you very much. Shilpa,
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Can I please request our chair to give a token of appreciation to both of our panelists who are present with us here today on behalf of PIC? And could we please request you all to come forward for a group photo, Ambassador Mambawale? Please join them on stage. We are going to dive directly into our final session for the day, the last but not the least by any accounts.